Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our tactical breakdown series. Now, this is of course the series in which we take an analytical, statistical look at one of the fixtures and the games. Obviously, the most recent one in this case it is Arsenal's North London derby home match against Tottenham, in which they drew 2-2 in a game which I was obviously there. And if you guys watched the match day vlog, which I hope you have, it's still on the channel. Please do go and check that out. I was rather visibly frustrated with the result at the end of the game, but we're going to take a more in-depth look at some of the reasons why it happened, some of the intricacies of the game, and some of the highlights that stood out to not just myself, but the two guests that I have on each and every single week. And that's, of course, Graham Brooks and our good friend Drew as well. And they'll be here giving their specific highlights of a tactical standpoint of what they particularly thought stood out for those guys. So first of all, I want to talk about what is always the key, and that is the man of the match. Now, before we jump into that, of course, if you're enjoying the series, give it a like. Please subscribe if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show, and you can tune into some of our live shows, our raw reactions and our podcasts, and get your questions across to myself and the guests as well. But let's jump straight in and talk about the man of the match, which of course I think we can agree there was only one man for this, in my opinion at least, and that was Matteo Guendouzi. Now, you can see on your screen now some of the passes that he was making during the game. He was playing in a midfield with obviously Torreira and Xhaka, and we're going to talk about the structure of that midfield in a second with Graham, but just specifically to focus on the Frenchman and what he provided for the team, you can see the passes are positive beyond belief. The passes are so forward thinking, trying to constantly drive into the opposition half, make things happen, and that's because the way in which we played basically meant that the onus was all on Matteo Guendouzi to be the creator, to be the person to make that link between midfield and attack, and that was a big burden for someone so young, but I thought he dealt with it brilliantly. He was the driving force to midfield, it was the only really link that we had, and I certainly think when you compare that to the passes that he was playing in a man of the match performance, in which I described in our tactical breakdown as a man of the match performance against Newcastle in our 1-0 win away from home, you look at the difference in passes in which he played in that game. That was obviously a game in which we saw a midfield with Willock playing in a more advanced position as the person to make that link between attack and midfield, but this time it was all on Matteo Guendouzi, and he took on that role exceptionally. It's a shame that midfield didn't back him up, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But before we do, I just want to show you a couple of examples. Here you can see a pass that was played in behind for Kolasinac. This is in the first half. Pepe had at this point already dragged himself inside, Aubameyang there as well, dragging himself more central, and Matteo Guendouzi basically became this guy that connected our midfield to the wide areas, being that Pepe or Aubameyang, or was one of our fullbacks, and he sprayed the play exceptionally well, and you could see that in some of the passing graphics a second ago. You've also got the opportunity where he creates the second goal, which puts us on level terms in the second half. He drives into the final third of the pitch with excellent skill and confidence, taking on several Spurs players, composes himself before crossing I say crossing, it's more of an instinctive curling effort, incisiveness over the top of the Spurs defence for an absolutely fantastic finish from the Gabonese striker Aubameyang, and that sort of epitomised Guendouzi's game as a whole. Really, really professional, really succinct, and really, really in tune with the other players on the pitch, and I think that sums it up brilliantly. I'm now going to pass you over to our good friend Graham Brooks, who's going to break down what he thought of his main key highlight and main key tactical insight of the game in the North London derby.
What I'm going to talk about today, Tom, is our central midfield yesterday. Emery went with the 4-3-3. He went with Xhaka, who sat at the base. He went with Guendouzi on the left and Torreira on the right of the three, although he was playing more than number 10. This surprised me, Torreira being a DM playing forward. And I think that this was where our problems lied yesterday. It was a slightly defensive midfield three, and Torreira hasn't got the passing ability of a number 10. It also meant that in transition, Tottenham were able to transition very quickly through our midfield. There were vacant spaces through our central midfield pretty much the whole of that first half, and that's how their first goal came, with the long punt downfield, with Socrates making a poor decision to come and challenge with a header. If he's going to go for it, he's got to get there to centre half, but he didn't. And then Son came playing in the Lamella, and then Leno parrying out the shot and Eriksen tucking it away. So clearly, it was a very defensive setup first half with those three defensive-minded midfield players, and it wasn't working. He left it really to about 60 minutes before he changed it. Ceballos came on, and immediately we saw the change with Ceballos, who can play deep, who can play forward, play the passes out wide, and immediately we looked far better with him at number 10. So I think the lesson out of our central midfield setup I took out of the game yesterday was that if Emery is going to play a number 10, it shouldn't be Torreira. Torreira needs to play as the DM. And if he's going to play number 10, I would have thought it would be Ceballos or Willock.
Now, for me, Graham perfectly sums up the key part of this game and the key reason as to why I feel we didn't take all 3 points. The decision-making of Unai Emery of his midfield, for me, was baffling. And I think I was actually a little blindsided, in hindsight, of how excited I was at seeing Pepe, Aubameyang and Lacazette playing together, that I didn't really take into account in enough detail the midfield three that we decided to play. Torreira playing in this more advanced position, as Graham talks about, with Matteo Guendouzi basically naturally, habitually taking on that role that Torreira, I think, actually was given more of the emphasis to do. Really sort of confused the midfield. Torreira is a naturally more deeper player, instinctively didn't get as far forward as maybe Emery might have wanted him to. Xhaka playing at the base of that midfield did a classic Xhaka thing of getting turned quite easily, was very slow in transition, and that meant that ultimately with those three, whilst Guendouzi was fantastic and put in a world-class performance, we just didn't see the connection between the midfield and the front line, and that really, really cut us off. It also meant, as Graham talked about, that when we were hit on the counter, there were huge, huge spaces. We're going to take a look at some of those now. I mean, you have a look at this opportunity here in the 15th minute, which ultimately this was straight after Spurs actually scored, and in that moment you're seeing there that still we haven't learnt the lesson. In transition, Eriksen in so much space, again in the 61st minute in the second half, still after the half-time team talk, we've got ourselves back into the game. We're trying to hold on to a one-goal deficit and trying to recover that as well. And yet we're still leaving huge spaces in the middle of the park, and it was really, really concerning to see. Again, in the 88th minute, at this point, we're still trying to go for the win and really, really trying to hold on to just simply a point if we couldn't even get that. But even in that moment, we were really struggling. You can see there, Eriksen free in the space. The closest player to him is another teammate, which is baffling in this final third of the position on the pitch. And then finally, in the 90th minute, when you think that maybe ultimately we couldn't have not really got a win from this point, but certainly trying to hold on to it, leading up to the point at which Kane arguably could have had a penalty. A lot of people saw it as a dive. I'm not really going to get into that in too much detail. But Sissoko was able to break free on the left-hand flank, and thank God it was Sissoko, because if there's one man that you want on the Spurs' team that isn't going to take his chance, it's probably the Frenchman, and he didn't in that opportunity, and they were just left with so much space on the pitch. As Graham said, when Ceballos came on, it changed completely. We looked more dynamic, we looked more energetic on the field. It was ultimately part of the reason why we got our equaliser and why we nearly got back into the game and got 3 points in hand. And we should have started with a more attacking-minded midfield to join either Torreira, Guendouzi or Xhaka. I thought that Xhaka was so poor. I talked about it in my Raw Reaction live vlog of the show, of the game, and for me that was a really, really key point as to why we didn't take all 3 points from the game. Now we're going to have a look at some of the same old mistakes that we made that led to the first goal we conceded right at the beginning. We had a really, really bright first 10 minutes to the game, but it was this goal which really just set aside ourselves for the next basically end up until the point at which we scored our first goal of the match. It was a really, really painful thing to watch. Long ball up from Lloris, in which Xhaka goes and challenges with Harry Kane, doesn't win it, which is fine, usually. Except you're in a situation here where Sokratis has run so far forward to try and get involved with this, thinks he can win it and doesn't, and then when Kane wins it, he's in this like bugger moment. What do I do now? Because it then gets to the point where David Luiz has to push himself up to try and close Son down. Son, knowing that he's getting closed down by David Luiz at pace, needs to do so, can easily turn the Brazilian centre-back, and then he's on his way. Laying off Lamela. Lamela gets the shot away, which Leno then really poorly parries. Now, Leno in this situation should palm it round off the pitch for a corner. But the way in which he takes it, it's like he's caught in two minds. Should I keep hold of it? Should I palm it? I'm not sure. And in that moment, it leads to the middle ground, which in this case is obviously Eriksen being able to run onto it. But you can also see that I've highlighted Sokratis because he's pointing at Eriksen. He's pointing at the man that he needs to be marking. Maitland-Niles is in a different position to the pitch because of how disorganised we are. Maitland-Niles has to get back and try and cover Lamela. He's the fastest person in that back line, and he was the only person that was going to be able to do it. He couldn't quite get there to stop the shot, but it meant that Sokratis was so unaware of his position and everywhere else on the pitch that he just sort of stands and runs back in no man's land, and then unaware Christian Eriksen runs and charges in behind him and is easily able to put Spurs 1-0 up. And for me, this epitomised our poor performances in not just today, but in so many games across so many seasons, something that we're not learning from, and something that Arsenal, if they want to take themselves to the next level, which is not only coming in top four, but ultimately in the future, we hope, fingers crossed, competing for bigger trophies, this is something that needs to change. And if it's under Unai Emery, great. But I'm starting to feel that I'm not sure or not whether it will be under the Spaniard. Now we're going to move on to talking about the substitutions in the second half and how Kolasinac sort of involved the pitch. And to do that, I'm going to hand over to my good friend Drew, who's going to give you his thoughts on this part of the game.
So 2-2 at home could have been a lot worse. Simple as that. But I think the biggest thing to take away from it is we didn't follow up the Liverpool result with another drop 3 points. One thing I did want to talk about briefly was the on social media after the result, and a lot of people were bringing up the fact that Emery brought on Henrik Mkhitaryan in the second half instead of someone like Reece Nelson. I want to touch on that a little bit. I think on the strength of it, the way I analyzed it was you could almost see what he was trying to do with that. Obviously, Reece is potentially a more dynamic player. He has a bit more pace, more direct, obviously. But I think we have to consider what we're missing when Lacazette came off the pitch, particularly. That work rate, his ability to drop deep, link to midfield, particularly because we were playing a 4-3-3, so we really needed that link between who at the time was Denis Ceballos and Matteo Guendouzi. So I feel like Mkhitaryan's ability to come in central, really kind of play between the lines, link midfield, and most importantly, because Oba then tucked centrally after Lacazette was removed, we started to rely more and more on overlaps from Kolasinac down the left flank. They caused a bit of problems, actually. Some of our, created some halfway decent chances, had a goal disallowed through that vein. But I think for me, if you bring Nelson on, he wants to always be on the ball, run at his defenders, and there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But I think it would have taken away a chance to really sort of try to focus on getting Oba more service than maybe what he was getting in the first half. Obviously, Mkhitaryan has more experience, particularly playing with Aubameyang because during their time at Dortmund. So I think for me, the tactical choice to bring on someone who offered maybe a bit more creativity, a bit more nuance off the ball, ability to connect the lines, as I said, I think it was the right tactical call in terms of what we needed, what we were missing when Lacazette came off, and what we needed to continue with the match plan. And certainly, once Oba goes at central forward, you have to almost play a certain way to really get him increasingly involved and get the goals. And you saw that last season as well. The amount of times we would play down the left flank, try to set him up through cutbacks, balls across the box. Causes a lot of danger. Spurs didn't really particularly deal with it incredibly well. So I think it was the right decision. But Reece will get his chances, obviously. Came out last night, early this morning, that Mkhitaryan might be on his way to Roma on a loan. So, thank you for his service, obviously. But it's a good avenue for young players to now come through and see what they can do. So, yeah.
I have to agree with what Drew says about the substitution for the reasons that he outlines about why we brought on Mkhitaryan and didn't bring on Nelson. If it was down to me, would I have rather have seen Nelson come on? I think I do. But I also think that decision is based on the benefit of hindsight for sure. All the points that Drew highlights about the decision that we made to bring on Mkhitaryan for Lacazette was, first of all, down to the fact that a lot of people, and the people around me in the stadium, were very agitated. And I don't think they realised at the time that Lacazette was actually slightly injured. He called over to the bench for the substitution. Having watched that back and listened back to some other commentators about the game, that is what happened. That's why we made the change. But the reason to bring on the Armenian is highlighted by Drew, and I'm not going to repeat what he said. But quite simply, it is down to the experience. That's the main one. He knows what he's doing. And if that had happened, then it would have been a great choice. The issue is that Mkhitaryan didn't deliver what Unai Emery wanted him to. I definitely see it was the whole point to try and put the emphasis on getting Kolasinac in behind because he was getting a lot of joy. And actually, I want to talk about Kolasinac in a little bit more detail. Before I do, I want to highlight this point here, which you can see on the screen, which is the Mkhitaryan back heel to Kolasinac, which led to a chance being played across the box. This was the only time, according to me sifting through this content, that I found a forward pass from Mkhitaryan to our fullback. Now, for me, if Mkhitaryan's come on in that role, it's to emphasise both Alba through the middle and it's emphasising Kolasinac on the left wing. And he needed to be more proactive, and he didn't. And I think that's why we're sanctioning the move. Obviously, this is being pre-recorded to go out tomorrow, which is today for you guys, Tuesday. This is being recorded on Monday, so the deal, I'm assuming, will go through and will happen. And I think he really killed himself in this game. Like, he completely ruined himself at Arsenal under Unai Emery, because that performance that he put in simply was not good enough. And I think Unai Emery now knows that it's much more realistic and better and positive for the club to put more emphasis on the likes of Saka, Nelson and Martinelli coming off the bench, being more impactful and helping the team. Just to carry on talking about Kolasinac though, something that I've been critical of, and I did this tactical breakdown talking about how he acted in the Europa League final and some of the ways that he cost us so many chances. He held on the ball for too long. And you can see this instance in the 13th minute. And I highlighted it earlier on with one of Guendouzi's passes. Guendouzi's played the ball in behind for Kolasinac here. And instead of crossing the ball in first time, he takes that extra touch and he then falls over and the chance goes. And it was that I was really concerned about at the start. I was like, oh, here we go again. He's going to take those extra touches. He's easily closed down. But actually, throughout the game, he showed that his first time crossing was improving. Now, the final ball was a bit of an issue, and he will improve with that if he gets more game time, which I'm sure until Tierney comes back and with Monreal now gone, he will. But his first time crossing was better. Every time he got the ball, we crossed it in. You look at this example here in the 46th minute of the first half, I believe it was. Or actually, it might be the second half. Right at the start of the second half. He's crossing the ball in first time after he's received it. Even later on in the 49th minute, again, to the byline, crosses it first time. And he did this throughout the game. First time crosses went in, and that for me shows improvement, because I was really critical of Kolasinac, and I think defensively he was awful, don't get me wrong. But offensively, that's when we know he is good, and I think he improved, and he ultimately could have, had he been onside, got us that third goal to win the game, which was a big shame. But I wanted to highlight that in a positive way, and I think there were a lot of positive take from the game. I'm excited to see where this now goes. And see how we improve and push on from this, because I definitely think the point suits us a lot more than it does Spurs. I think it definitely suits us more that we came back from 2-0 down rather than the losing a 2-0 lead, and I think that's ultimately positive to look at. But in the comments, please do let me know what you think of today's show, what you thought of the game. Was there any tactical parts of the game you think we missed out? Obviously we can only cover so much, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give it a like, please subscribe. If you're new around here, please go check out Drew and Graham on Twitter. All of their details are always in the description, and I'll see you again very, very soon, most likely for Eyes of the Opposition. But it is an international break, so we're going to take a bit of a gap, of course, trying to find a little bit more content here and there, maybe some little side dishes for you a little bit out there, but we'll see what happens. I hope you enjoy your break from club football for a bit. I know it's going to be a struggle for myself, but I'll see you again very, very soon, and as always, up the Arsenal.